we have best-selling author, podcast host with over several hundred million downloads, the one, the only, Rich Roll. Rich.
What is this middle-aged 40-something corporate attorney doing in these races and not eating any animal products?
You are incredibly high-functioning, accomplished, but yet you're kind of like struggling with these demons inside.
I had failed to realize my potential as an athlete as a result of my alcoholism.
What makes Rich truly remarkable is that less than 2 years prior to his first Ultraman, he didn't even own a bike.
Mood follows action. Could you help explain?
I don't want to be 75 or 80 years old and only have one friend.
Rich might be the most self-actualized person I've met in quite a while. Hey everyone, welcome to another exciting episode with Aarthi and me. And today we have a treat. Somebody who both me and Aarthi, especially Aarthi, has been a fan of for a very, very long time. And somebody I'm sure who is ridiculously handsome, good looks you've seen often over the internet. We have best-selling author, podcast host with over several hundred million downloads, the one, the only, Rich Roll. Rich, thank you so much for joining us.
Welcome. Woo-hoo.
Thank you for having me. I'm so delighted to spend an hour with you guys. I love what you guys are doing. I love the energy, and it's just it's a treat to talk to you guys today.
No, I mean, the pleasure is all ours, and thank you. And one of the things that, we were chatting about offline was I love how open you've been about your story, your journey, your struggles in multiple levels. And maybe for, some of our viewers who may not be familiar with your backstory, could you just kind of tell us like how you came to be the origin story of Rich Roll, if you like?
Oof. Okay. Well, in a nutshell, how do I best describe this? I grew up in Washington, D.C. I was sort of an awkward, insecure kid who struggled academically, struggled athletically, kind of found my calling in the swimming pool and pursued that for many years, and in lockstep with my progression as a competitive swimmer in my younger years. That translated into the classroom, and I graduated from high school near the top of my class and got into all the fancy schools, ended up going to Stanford and competed on the Stanford swimming team, which at the time in the late 1980s was the top NC2A program in the country, and then quickly proceeded to squander all of those amazing opportunities down a bottle, and had a 12-year experience as a progressive alcoholic that took me to some pretty dark and desperate places, but ultimately got sober at 31. And for the first time, kind of changed all of my priorities in life and learned a new set of tools to how to, guide me moving forward. But then spent the next 10 years as a corporate lawyer trying to repair my relationships and, kind of overcome the wreckage of my past and become that person of tremendous potential that I had once been. And during that period of time, really, despite being sober and making sobriety a priority, didn't do enough internal work to really wrestle with, who my authentic self kind of lying dormant within was. Well, I was just sort of jamming a square peg into a round hole and trying to do the right things that society would approve of to, be a successful, responsible person in the world. And had a bit of a second come to Jesus reckoning moment shortly before I turned 40, where it all kind of caught up with me. I had a health scare because I've been overlooking my health and well-being for many years and had transferred a lot of that alcoholic energy into unhealthy diet and lifestyle habits while I was pursuing this legal career, which was very much at odds with who I truly, wanted to be in the world. So I was having a sort of existential crisis, I guess you could call it. Mm-hmm. And that all kind of came to a head shortly before I turned 40 and decided that I needed to change my priorities. And that began with my relationship with food. Ultimately, I ended up adopting a 100% plant-based diet and experienced a bit of a physical resurgence and vitality as a result of that, which got me interested in moving my body once again, really out of a search for the things that brought me joy as a young person, which are very primal, simple things like jumping into a swimming pool or, just, what it feels like to have that elevated heart rate, and to kind of spend time with myself, and lost 50 pounds relatively quickly, and realized that I had some latent potential as an athlete in the endurance space that had been kind of lying dormant. And I had, I had failed to realize my potential as an athlete as a result of my alcoholism, with my swimming career. And I guess on some level felt I had unfinished business, and, got really involved in the ultra endurance world, and proceeded to distinguish myself in some, really long, kind of outrageous multi-day triathlon races, and did a couple things that caught the notice of the media, for a couple reasons. First of which being like, what is this middle-aged 40-something, corporate attorney doing in these races and doing well? And secondarily, like, he's not eating any animal products. Like, how does that work? And, there's plenty of plant-based athletes killing it right now, but back in 2008, 2009,
that was
there weren't
not a
that many.
thing.
And that was, it was not really a thing. So that media attention led to the opportunity to write a book, called Finding Ultra, that came out in 2012, which told that story. It's sort of an addiction recovery memoir, and also kind of a midlife reboot and search for self type primer. And that book did well. And on the wake of that book coming out, in 2012, I started my podcast back in a time when people were not clamoring to start podcasts, and it was not cool to have a podcast, and have just been doing it ever since, and have been really consistent. And that audience has grown slowly and organically over time. And here I am, still
This is
doing
great.
it, and still in love with it.
That is an amazing story. I mean,
I feel like we have 2,000 follow-up questions from everything you just said. So Sriram and I are like clamoring for white space here.
When I think about your story, one of the things that's really fascinating is there are so many arcs to it. Highly accomplished endurance athlete at a young age, and obviously, and by the way, thank you so much for just being so open about this, but then obviously struggling with alcohol, and then kind of like having this moment of epiphany. Could you actually talk about that? Because one of the things which really struck me is, from the outside, in your 20s, you are incredibly high functioning, accomplished, you're a swimmer, and, but yet you're kind of like struggling with these demons inside. And I suspect that a lot of people who might be listening to this are out there who have some variation of it, where they seem highly successful, or incredibly physically fit, but they may be struggling with something which may be an addiction. So could you maybe describe like what that felt like, or maybe for folks listening, what are maybe warning signs they should be looking for?
Yeah, sure. I mean, in my case, and I always try to share from personal experience, and, shy away from giving any advice. All I know is what I have experienced personally. And, I've learned over the years that, the specifics of my story are my own, although there's kind of general principles that emerge from that are, relatable for other people. And I would start by saying that, I know for a fact that as a young person, I was a kind of very quiet, insecure kid who struggled to make connections with other people, and kind of became like a bookwormy sort of outsider as a young person. And my gravitation towards the swimming pool was, not unrelated to that, because that was a very comfortable place for me, away from the bullying that I was experiencing in school, and almost like a womb-like safe zone for me, where I could be myself. And probably, there's a good argument that my first addiction was swimming. And I think kind of tangential to that was a search for external validation. I grew up in a household in which achievement, especially in the classroom, was a huge priority. And although there wasn't a lot of kind of overt pressure, it was sort of understood, like, we're here to excel. And love was very much calibrated in lockstep with how well I was doing, in the classroom or as an athlete. And I think that's still a struggle that I contend with today, that, I'm only as worthy as my achievements, and I think that's probably something that a lot of high achieving, type A founders and, people that tune into your audience might be able to relate to. And I had a kind of sense of, this ease within myself. I never felt comfortable in my own skin. I never felt comfortable in social situations. I didn't know how to talk to people, let alone, talk to a girl or any of that kind of stuff. And when I discovered alcohol, it was like this magic salve that removed all of that insecurity and anxiety and allowed me, perhaps for the very first time, to feel comfortable in my own skin. And all I remember about that was thinking, wow, I just want to feel this way all the time. It was as if, I suddenly had a rule book for life that had been missing, that everyone else seemed to be clued in on. And, for quite some time, alcohol worked. Like, people become addicts and alcoholics not because it's dysfunctional out of the gate. It is serving some need. It might be an unhealthy outlet for, kind of salving whatever internal pain or discomfort you're experiencing. But in the short term, it works. And so for quite some time, I was a functional alcoholic. I mean, it did slowly denigrate the quality of my life, with every succeeding month and year. And a lot of the aspirations that I held for myself and that kind of potential that I had suddenly became secondary to just chasing, my next good time. And it wasn't until many years later where it got really dark and desperate and lonely and, kind of frankly pathetic. I destroyed all my relationships, and my family didn't want anything to do with me. And I was on the precipice of getting fired. Like, it was a disaster. I had a marriage that went sideways. It was, there was nothing romantic or sexy or rock and roll about it. And in the wake of getting sober, as they say in the parlance of recovery, like, the road gets narrower. So yes, I had stopped using alcohol and drugs, but that, innate addictive tendency will latch on to anything to try to, take you out of the present moment and, salve whatever internal discomfort that you're having. And that can come in the form of relationships or food or gambling or any kind of, or your mobile device, as we all, are becoming increasingly familiar with. Anything to, distance yourself from whatever, internal consternation you're experiencing. And, over the many years that I've been sober, it's not about like, oh my God, am I going to pick up a drink? It's more about my daily emotional sobriety. Like, how grounded am I? How connected am I to my behaviors and the behaviors that are kind of moving me forward toward the person I want to be, or distancing me from that because I just have something I don't want to look at or I don't want to deal with. And, the longer that I've been sober, the more convinced I've become that, addiction really lives on a gigantic spectrum. And I think most people could identify themselves somewhere along that spectrum. At the far polarity, you have, heroin addicts and, gutter drunks, et cetera. And on the other polarity, you have people that just, can't stop scrolling on their phone or continue to get into the same bad relationship. And they're very high functioning, but clearly there's, sort of an obsessive compulsive behavior pattern that everyone could probably, find in their own lives, that is some form of addiction that is preventing them from, really being the most self-actualized and authentically expressed person that they can be.
Bob, thank you for sharing that. If people haven't read it, I highly recommend that they go read the book, because it goes into that. And, I think in some ways your second sort of come to Jesus, wake up moment when you're close to 40. One of the things which strikes me about you is we live in a world where a lot of people become very successful very young, in their 20s, and you see them becoming billionaires. And what I love about your story is you have lived quite the life, and then you become famous and successful and have a bestseller. And, by the way, it's not just the health or life issues, you kind of put it all on the line when you're trying to write this book and make this podcast work. You have a great story around that. Do you feel like that you, having quote unquote made it professionally over the age of 40, somehow makes you appreciate it more, handle it better than maybe if you had the success you had, at age 22?
There's absolutely no question. I was in no position emotionally spiritually to handle any kind of success at that young of an age. And I think the only way that I've been able to kind of manage and weather the sort of success that I'm experiencing now is because of all the experiences, that I've had and all the setbacks. And, I'm sort of surprised at the success that I'm experiencing now, because I didn't set out to become financially successful or, kind of a celebrity podcaster or anything like that. Like, when I really had my reckoning about who I wanted to be in the world, I reached a place where I let go of all of those aspirations that I had kind of attached to a more traditional career trajectory, and made a very conscious decision that I was just going to pursue my curiosity and try to find the things that brought me joy, and to return in service whatever I learned along the way to other people through, through writing and through podcasting and through public speaking, et cetera. And of course, I was intent on figuring out a way to do that such that I could pay my bills and take care of my family. But financial abundance, I had already let go of that even being a possibility. So an argument can be made that all of what's happening now is it's really tangential and accidental, because I wasn't seeking that. I was just seeking to find meaning in my own life, and to, convert that meaning into something substantive and helpful and meaningful for other people. And I've experienced success as a result of doing that. And I'm very proud of that. And it feels great and all of that, but it wasn't like something that I whiteboarded out and tried to, figure out some kind of trajectory towards. It's happened as a result of, just continuing to, try to share authentically and do it in a meaningful way.
Wow, that's amazing. One of my favorite quotes that I saw, is, "But what makes Rich truly remarkable is that less than 2 years prior to his first Ultraman, he didn't even own a bike, let alone race one." You just started like with absolutely no kind of skills in this whole Ultraman running business, and you get into the World Ultraman Championships, the Epic 5 Challenge. Why that? That seems a little extreme. I know a lot of runners. I am one myself, but to go there to like the very pinnacle of extreme, I don't know, strain. Why go through that path and that route?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I think there's two answers to that. I mean, the first one is, I'm the first one to admit that I'm drawn to extremes. I mean, sort of alcoholism is an extreme, or trying to be, an Olympian in the swimming pool. That's an extreme, pursuit. And there's something about, reaching beyond yourself and what you think you're capable of that makes me feel alive. And you can make the argument that there is a light dusting of addiction and alcoholism layered into that. People often ask me, like, well, isn't, these pursuits that you've done in the ultra world, isn't that just you translating your alcoholism from one thing to the next? And I do think there's some truth to that. Ultimately, those pursuits have made me a better person. So there are, qualitative distinctions, but, I love, seeing what happens if I push the envelope and really put myself on the line. And the ultra endurance world is an amazing template for self-exploration, which brings me to the second point, which is I didn't get into these races. Yes, there was a little bit of like, oh, I didn't realize my potential as an athlete. Let me see, what I can do. That's part of it. But the bigger piece really was I was having this kind of existential crisis about what to do with my life. And I think, the training and the discipline that goes into preparing for those crazy races, requires you to be in a state of discomfort for, fantastically extended periods of time. So I would be out on my bike all day long or going on super crazy long runs, and all of that time alone with an elevated heart rate and kind of focusing on my breath is sort of an active meditation in which I had the space to really grapple with my internal demons. And when you're in these races and you're pushing yourself beyond what you're capable of, really meet yourself in the most honest way possible. Like, you can't run from the truth of who you are. And I needed that confrontation in my own life to figure out what I wanted to be, who I wanted to be, and what I wanted to do. I knew that I needed to, kind of transcend this traditional career paradigm, but I didn't know how I was going to move forward. And the only way to answer that question was to go super deep inside myself. And the ultra endurance world for me was like a spiritual odyssey
Yeah, I
in
was going to
which,
ask that.
I could grapple with those questions.
And did spirituality, I recently I listened to your episode on spirituality where you have this collection of different interviews from the past. What role does spirituality play, or did it play, uh, as you go into these Ultramans and just like basically reinvent yourself? What role does spirituality play
Mhm.
there?
Yeah, I mean, I would say without getting too mystical or woo-woo about the whole thing, that
Yeah.
it's all spiritual for me. I remember when I was in treatment, and I talk about this in the book, early in that experience, a counselor asked me, "Rich, are you a human being having a spiritual experience, or are you a spiritual being having a human experience?" And I was like, "What? I don't understand that question." Like, I had not had any experience with grappling with spirituality up
Hmm.
to that point. Like, I had grown up in a traditional household in which we would occasionally go to church, but religion wasn't part of my upbringing. I never connected with that at all,
Hmm.
and was very much a pragmatist and a materialist. And in the process of trying to get sober, it occurred to me that my best thinking, and I thought I was a smart guy because I got into all these fancy colleges, but my best thinking ended me up in a mental institution. And that was the truth. And I needed to really find a different way of approaching my life. And, the 12-step paradigm of recovery, which is the rubric under which I've gotten sober and stayed sober and am still very much a member of and very active in, is a spiritual program. It involves a higher power of your own choosing, and it's non-denominational or religious in any way, but it is a spiritual program, and it's asking you to really embrace the fact that you are not the center of the universe, that there are forces at play that are beyond your control. And when you kind of surrender to that and be in more of an allowing space of relinquishing your self-will, which is antithetical to anybody who is a high achiever, that is the place in which magic can occur. And it was very difficult for me to really embody that sensibility as somebody who truly believed that everything that I had been successful in was a direct result of my self-will. Like, I
Hmm.
don't think of myself as a particularly talented person, but I know how to work hard. And, if I apply myself, then I can be successful. And, I really ran into a brick wall with that and had to find a different way, a way of letting go, a way of kind of surrendering and being in this allowing place and understanding that, you're not in control. And when you try to control things, ultimately they, in the long term, go awry. And so
Hmm.
everything that I have kind of been successful in in the wake of being sober, I don't attribute to myself, but to being a vessel or a vehicle for a message and a resonance that is in service to other people.
Hmm.
Here's a phrase that I think which matters. We've spoken about a lot. Mood follows action. What does that mean to you? Could you help explain?
Yeah, sure. So I wish I'd come up with that myself. That I attribute that quote to um, my first sponsor in the secret society of alcoholic recovery. And it was first uttered to me when I think it was, I was asked to, there was something that I didn't want to do, like I didn't feel like doing it, and my sponsor said mood follows action. And I was like, what does that mean? It's like, just do the thing, like get out of your own way. And the emotional state that you seek is not going to ultimately just, fall upon you. It's a function of the actions that you undertake. And there's now, neuroscience, neurochemistry to support this. So, for example, you wake up and you don't feel like going to the gym, right? And you're like, well, I'll go when I feel like it. Well, how often do you actually feel like going? Not very often, but every time you go, you feel better afterwards. So, in other words, it's the action that changes the emotional state as opposed to the emotional state changing such that you will undertake the action. So, it's about getting out of your own way and setting aside the chatter of the idle mind and just being prone to action first, as opposed to getting caught up in your emotional state, working as a barrier, preventing you from actually undertaking the things that you need to do, whether that's a simple to-do list, whether it's a fitness goal, whether it's a professional task that you keep delaying, and so as a mantra, it's very effective to just get out of your own head and kind of prioritize action as opposed to listening to, that idle chatter that, recurs in all of our brains.
Wow.
I like that a lot. Okay, I want to talk about fitness, and first of all, I think you might be the most good-looking person we've had on the show so far, and so
Too kind.
that should be the title of the video. But what is what is the week right now for you? In the current stage of your life, look like on a diet
Fitness
and workout perspective.
Yeah, I mean, right now it's all at a very low boil. I'm not training for any crazy races at the moment, and I haven't been in a highly competitive setting since 2017, I think was the last time I did a really big race. So I stay connected to it, but I'm not training to, kind of sort of distinguish myself in that world at the moment because I have too many other competing interests right now vying for my attention and my time. And the kind of, equation that I run in my mind is what is the best use of my time and energy in terms of being as impactful in the world as I can possibly be. And sometimes training for a race, especially I'm turning 56 in 2 weeks. Like I think doing something hard at my age, I think could be a really cool thing to show other people like, hey, it's still possible at my maturing age that you can still get out there and do hard things and have fun doing it. But ultimately, training for those races takes up so much time. I mean, it's like a job. And if I'm doing that, then it means I'm not able to do as many podcasts, or perhaps the quality of the content that I'm putting out in the world might suffer. And I'm not willing to do that right now. So on a daily basis, I'm probably putting in somewhere between 10 and 15 hours a week of fitness related activities. And that involves strength training, swimming, cycling. I'm not running very much right now. I've got a lower back issue that I'm trying to sort out, but I just was on a bike ride this morning for 2 hours. And it's really about joy for me. Like I need it for my mental health as much as for my physical health. And I'm not doing it for performance reasons as much as I'm doing it because it's something that I love to do. And I make sure that I, prioritize and carve out time to do that. And on the diet piece, it hasn't changed that much over the years. I keep things really simple, plant-based foods as close to their natural state as possible. A morning smoothie with dark leafy greens, vegetables, berries, maybe some chia seeds and hemp seeds for omega-3s. That usually, hits the spot for the first part of the day. I often do like a 16-8 fast. So sometimes I skip lunch and just eat a larger dinner. If I do eat lunch, I keep it pretty light, like a salad or some soup, maybe a green juice or something like that. And dinner time is where I really get the calories in. So lots of Mexican food, lots of beans and lentils, which are high in protein, and just, tons of fruits and vegetables, pretty much. I mean, it's nothing special. I think people conflate plant-based eating as being something that's expensive and very time consuming. But, I eat pauper food and I keep it really simple, like rice and beans with hot sauce and guacamole I'm good to go. And I eat lots of food. Like I don't eat small portions. I, put down the calories pretty good, and it's been serving me now. I've been plant-based for 15 years, and I'm still able to get out and, push myself physically and put on lean muscle mass and all of that. So I haven't had any problems with it. And I love the lifestyle. And I love the fact that not only is it good for your body, it's a way of sidestepping a lot of these lifestyle ailments that are unnecessarily debilitating millions of people every year, but it's
Yeah.
also more environmentally sustainable to eat lower on the food chain. And obviously, it's more compassionate to opt out of the ills of animal agriculture.
Yeah, I mean, we grew up in India, vegetarians. So for us, it wasn't hard to like continue to be a vegetarian here, right? Like we have the same,
Mm,
similar to you, lots of veggies, lots of Indian food, especially like really focuses on fresh veggies and fruits, and that's kind of like a lot of, and it's like legumes, like lentils and rice and beans, and that's kind of it. Um, I think vegan is a little bit extreme because Indian cooking involves a lot of paneer, like cheese varieties and things like
sure.
that. I wanted to ask you, why did you go into plant-based food, but I think you just answered that. You just came, you have this whole cheese line, the vegan cheese line. um,
Hmm.
we tried it was great. It was fantastic. I couldn't tell the difference. um, why getting into nut-based cheese? Is it an extension of the plant-based diet, but with like now you can have cheese that's plant-based kind of thing?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, first of all, let me just be clear. That's my wife, Julie Pyatt's company.
Okay,
So it's her genius and her brainchild. I'm here to support it, but
it's
she's the
awesome.
founder. She's the CEO. This is her thing. And she's really built something really remarkable and beautiful. And it's an organic outgrowth of this lifestyle that we have been pursuing as a family for many years. And,
Right.
when I was training and racing really intensely, she really showed up for me to try to figure out how to feed me and nourish me in the best possible way. And she's an artist and very creative, and she came up with all these amazing recipes for plant-based eating that would really hit the spot for me, and as a way of supporting me towards these goals. And those recipes ended up in 2 cookbooks that we wrote together that are really her recipes, the Plant Power
Mhm.
Way and the Plant Power Way Italia. But over the course of many years, the refrain
I'm a
often
subscriber, by the way,
from
for the
other.
website Meal Planner. I just subscribed. It's great.
Oh, you did? Good, good,
Yeah.
good, good. Yeah, I'm really proud of that service that we offer. But yeah, she, the refrain, I lost my train of thought, but I think what I was trying to say was that you often hear like, "Oh, I would go plant-based, but like I love cheese too much." Like cheese is the one thing that people love, and I understand that. Like for me, kicking dairy was much harder than removing meat from my plate. There's something about cheese that's very alluring, and dairy finds its way into so many of the foods that we eat. And
Mhm.
so Julie was like, "I'm going to figure this out. Like I'm going to try to create a plant-based version of cheese that can like obviate that argument." And she spent 8 years like in the kitchen lab, like testing and trying new things, and has really emerged from that exploratory experience with a remarkable series of products that she now offers under the brand name Shrimu,
Yeah.
SRIMU.
Yeah.
These plant-based cheeses that I would say that most, if not, I would say 98% of the plant-based cheeses that you would find in the grocery stores are really not good, and
They're
they
not
all kind of
good.
taste the
I have
same.
to say I was
Yeah, they're
very
not good.
skeptical when I got the
Yeah,
package. I was like, "Oh man, one
yeah,
more like cashew nut
right.
thing. I don't know." And
Uh-huh.
I think I first tried the truffle-based one. It was fantastic. It was great. I gave it to my kid.
Yeah.
She loves cheese, and she loved it too. And she asked for more, which
Yeah.
it tells you everything.
We have never discussed cheese on the show before.
I know
This
it's
is a
great. It
first.
was
This is
really,
the
really
first.
good.
Uh,
All right.
Rich,
So if nothing else,
I suspect the typical, a lot of the listeners that we have are people like me who sit in front of a laptop or a screen most of the week. And definitely don't get the physical activity or the diet that they should be. And I think when people like me or them look at folks like you, Huberman, Peter Attia, David Goggins, etc., you folks are kind of intimidating, to be honest, right? Because you're like, oh my goodness, like they are so far ahead and seem so amazingly accomplished and driven in ways that regular mortals and civilians, can't be. And one of the it's why I think your story is fascinating. But for a regular person in say technology world or corporate America or anywhere else, who wants to make a change, what would be your here's your get started advice?
Sure. I mean, first of all, I live, in the world and I'm super busy and we have 4 kids. I'm hardly perfect at any of these things. And I understand when you think of Peter Attia or Andrew Huberman, like they have a level of like focus and extreme diligence when it comes to this that I aspire to, but I actually am not achieving in my own life. So I relate to the question myself. I'm just trying every day like everybody else. But I think some of the things that have served me well is letting go of this perfectionist ideal, like, oh, here's my morning routine, and every day I'm gonna get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and do deadlifts and get in the cold plunge and do my journaling and do my meditate. It's like, it is very intimidating. You're like, well, that's a 3-hour morning routine. Like,
I
it's
know.
just
How do they
not
do that? I'm like, I
sustainable.
just want to know how
So
you manage your time.
Yeah.
I don't either. Like, I do the best that I can, but I definitely fall short from that kind of idealized paradigm. I think the way to go about it is to make small changes and try to master them over time, and don't try to overwhelm yourself with trying to completely transform your life overnight. So for example, on the dairy piece, like, you know what, I'm used to putting whole milk in my coffee every morning. I'm gonna switch up to almond milk or oat milk or coconut milk or whatever it is. I'm gonna do that for 2 weeks, and that's all I'm gonna worry about. And then after a couple weeks, that becomes like a normal behavior, and you don't really think about it anymore. You've kind of inured yourself to it. And then you can look at something else, like, oh, maybe now I'll try to eat a little bit less of this, or I'll try this new thing. And I think when you approach it from a perspective of curiosity and treat it like kind of a fun adventure experience, as opposed to a martyr-like, experience of suffering,
Yeah.
you're in a better position to progress, because it's not about short-term gains. If you're trying to change your lifestyle, it has to be sustainable. So
Mhm.
I think baby steps are super important. And when you slip up and don't do it perfectly, to avoid beating yourself up, because then you've just made a second mistake. To
Mhm.
be gentle on yourself, I guess, is what I would say. And, try to think about the long term. Like, how do you want to be feeling and eating 5 years from now, 10 years from now? And making those small changes and trying to master the consistency behind that is much more important than making some sweeping change that only lasts, a couple months before you flame out. And I think the philosophy behind that is understanding and appreciating that every big change is really about tiny little things that you do every single day, right?
Mhm.
And breaking these things down into really digestible nuggets is the recipe for success that I've continued to pursue, and seems to work well.
Mhm. Got it.
That's amazing. It's like also, that's like Steph Curry trying to teach us how to do a 3-point shot. It sounds so simple,
Right.
It's
but
like you
it's
just pick up the ball and you
yeah,
throw
yeah,
it really high.
get it in the net. Uh,
But
I
like,
want
if you like, let's say you want to get into running and you've never run before, like, just go out and walk around the block. Like, you don't like, try to make it something that is doable in your
Mhm.
life. And then you kind of slowly build on those things. And I think people are very impatient. They want results overnight. And if you think of things in like 1,000-day, chunks, as opposed to 3-month chunks, and really kind of progress much more patiently and gradually than we're kind of hardwired to do. That is, I think, a secret weapon.
I want to talk to you about your podcast because, in some ways you're the prototype for the creators and the podcasters you've seen today. And you obviously have one of the most successful ones out
You've
there,
been doing it for 10
10
years.
years plus.
Yeah.
Mm.
So, and I want to ask you about some of your guests, but you've done hundreds, if not thousands, of episodes, what makes for a good guest and conversation, and what makes for a bad one?
Well, let's see. There's a lot packed into that. In terms of like who makes for a good guest, I think. Listen, not everybody is used to, having kind of long form conversations while they're being recorded. And some people just aren't wired for that, in which case it's the responsibility of the host to try to bring out the best in that person. And, they're not all going to go great. I've done 710. They're not all, 5 stars. But I think the important thing from a host perspective is, first, being very mindful of the people that you're inviting on, like who, and for me, I've learned over time that I have to be naturally, innately curious about that person, or it's not going to be a good conversation. Like I've been in situations where a lot of people say, oh, you got to have this person. They're amazing. But I'm not feeling it. And then I'll conduct that conversation and it's flat. And that's not because the guest isn't amazing. I'm just not the right person to have that conversation with them. So I think it's about learning to trust your own instincts about the kind of people that you want to engage with is super important. And preparation, secondly, is huge. I think a lot of podcast guests don't take preparation seriously enough, and I take it very seriously. So being well armed so that you can handle anything that comes at you from that person is key. And
Actually,
then third,
can I just on that point? Actually, I want to ask you because
Yeah.
it seems like there are two schools of thought when it comes to podcast preparation, right? There are folks, for example, Howard Stern, who spent research teams and who know every little thing there is to know about the guest. And then there are others who are like, I want to be surprised. Larry King, for example, was famous for, I want to be surprised. I don't want to know much about the guest because there's sometimes a feeling that if you're prepared, you already know where the conversation is going to go. And that can maybe kill little spontaneity. And how do you think about that? Because we discuss this a lot about how much should we prepare. Are we too over prepared on some guest? And we think about this a lot.
Yeah, that's actually a great insight and a very good point. And I've thought a lot about this as well. True. Larry King, famous for never preparing. Then you have, people like Howard Stern on the other side of the spectrum. I probably fall on the over prepared side of it. And that's just me. I think that it depends on, it's about understanding who you are. I think some people are very good at being quick on their feet, and that surprise element, I think, is works really well for that type of individual. I'm just not well suited for that, but I do think there is something to be said for being over prepared. So when I say prepared, I always kind of hold back maybe 15 to 20%. So that I can make room for that surprise, because I'm sure you've had that experience where you're talking to somebody and you actually know every story, and you kind of, you know exactly where they're going to go with everything that you say to them. And that can make for a flatter experience. So I think there is something to be said for leaving a little bit, on the table so that it can feel a little bit more organic and dynamic.
It's so true. I mean, it's funny because we're actually chatting about this when we were preparing to have you on the show, because we are such huge fans. We've read your books. We know so much. I have listened to you for so long. And we're like, okay, there's a part of it which is like our audience needs to hear these stories, and which is so amazing. But then we need to also figure out, okay, what are things that we haven't heard? And just this particular topic to get very meta. And it's interesting. Okay, and so I want to maybe go over some of your recent and maybe really popular guests, which are just really super fascinating. And maybe one of the most interesting episodes I think you've done for me recently was you had Mike Fremont on. And for folks who haven't watched the episode, we'll drop a link in. And Mike is over 100 years old. And he
holds all kinds of records.
Can do things which a lot of people half his age can't do. And I am curious, because I was so struck and moved by the episode, and I know lots of others where. What did you learn from Mike being in the room, getting to observe him? How was that experience for you?
I mean, that was a really remarkable experience, and such an honor and a treat for so many reasons. I mean, that came about because another guest of mine, Harvey Lewis, who's a elite ultramarathoner, is buddies with Mike and was like, you got to talk to Mike. He's amazing. And it kind of came about through that. And I think it's really important to respect our elders. And I don't think our culture does a very good job of that. And here's a guy who, has lived such a robust, long life and is doing such extraordinary things at his age, and yet is doing it in complete anonymity. Like most, the vast majority of people have no idea that this guy even exists. And yet he's got incredible stories and wisdom. And I think if I had to take one powerful lesson away from that, it's that longevity is innately tied to staying connected with the things that bring you joy. Friendship and community, I think, has really maintained his vitality in an important way, and his commitment to service. Like, he is animated by being a climate warrior. Like, that's his whole thing. Like, he loves talking about climate change issues and advocating for, green solutions to things. And he loves sort of giving back to other people what he's learned along the course of his journey. Like, service is just core to what keeps that guy going and gets him up out of bed in the morning. And I think that's really important and powerful. And I think, as a theme to my podcast, like, I have so many different types of people on, but the heart of my show, if I had to distinguish it from other ones, is, finding people like Mike who are doing extraordinary things, but doing them relatively anonymously, and getting the opportunity to introduce such a magical creature to a large audience is really, something that I love. And what's cool about Mike is that podcast was super popular, and a lot of other media outlets like picked up on it. And as a result, this past week he was in People magazine, and then last night he was on NBC Nightly News with Lester Holt. Like, he's now like a national media sensation. And I have I'm so proud of that. Like, I think it's so cool.
Yeah, Mike, you need to send Rich an agent's commission. But Rich, is it sometimes maybe fun for you to maybe discover someone? Not that somebody like Mike needs to be discovered, but as opposed to maybe having a celebrity and everyone knows and they're amazing, as opposed to somebody like Mike where you're like, nobody had you gave him the platform, and now, he's discovering stardom at the young age of like 100 something.
Yeah. I mean, it's fun to interview fancy celebrity people. I won't lie. Like, I definitely, have pinch me moments when I get to sit down with someone like Edward Norton and ask him a bunch of questions. But I think in terms of personal meaning, like the Mike Fremont type episodes are much more personally meaningful. They're more personally meaningful to the guest, and they are to me as well. And I think another example of that would be this guy, John McAvoy. I just did my second episode with him. I did an episode with him 4 years ago. And although he had some notoriety in the UK, he was somebody who was completely unknown in the United States, but has this unbelievable story of transformation, going from serving a double life sentence after a career as an armed robber and growing up in this notorious South London crime family, and transforming in prison into this athlete who broke world and British indoor rowing records, and then getting paroled and emerging into the world and becoming a professional athlete and an advocate for prison reform. Like, it's the most compelling cinematic story of transformation you can possibly imagine. And to get to sort of amplify a story like that and share it with people, I think is a beautiful thing. And it gives people hope, because that's a guy who was in a situation where everything did seem hopeless, and he was still able to find a way to, hold on to a higher version of himself. And over time, was able to manifest that. So no matter how far, you have departed from that, higher self within, the fact that somebody in that circumstance could still turn things around, I think is a ray of hope for the many people out there who suffer. On some level, we're all, struggling to be happier and find more meaning in our lives. And I think it's messages like that really, strike a chord with my audience.
Um, on maybe the more celebrity front, somebody you had on who's, built an audience himself, Andrew Huberman. What makes Andrew and his content good? Because I know you have a take on this.
Yeah, he's such an interesting individual. I mean, I think it's not a surprise that he's become so successful with his podcast, and I think it's a function of a couple things. I mean, first of all, he knows what he's talking about. He's the real deal when it comes to neuroscience. So he's not pretending to know things that he doesn't know. Like, he's steeped in the science. He has an absolute love and passion for the things that he talks about. So there's an authenticity, I think, there that's really important. But I think the real distinguishing factor with Andrew is that not only does he have the knowledge base, he has an extraordinary facility for communicating extremely complex ideas in a way that is digestible to his audience, but is not pandering. Like, he's never talking down to the audience, but he knows how to calibrate it such that he's challenging them just a little bit outside of their reach, but not too much. And I think people love that. Like, they love feeling like they're being challenged, they're being introduced to new ideas. And I think the other point that makes him so resonant is the fact that everything that he does is oriented around practical tools to improve your life. So it's not just an academic exercise. He's like, I studied all this stuff and I've extracted from the literature and the deep dive that I did to tell you these various things that you can apply into your life that will make your life better. So everything is oriented around trying to serve the audience in that way. And his, precision of language and the manner in which he's able to articulate his ideas, I think, is a true talent.
Wow, that's great. Another person who you had interviewed a while ago is Robin Arzon. And Robin, I got to know her through like riding the Peloton bike, and I would see her classes and just got really interested in it because her classes were hard. She would do these like hit classes and things like that, and I would just like get like really hooked onto it. What you interviewed her, and clearly you know her. What makes her good?
Robin is somebody I've known for a very long time. I knew her before she became this big mainstream celebrity who's like training Ashton Kutcher and Kim
Yes.
Kardashian for the marathon. It's like unbelievable. Like, she's on Good Morning America and the Today Show. Like, she's a legit like mainstream celebrity. And I'm so proud of her and happy for her because she deserves it. Like, she's really smart. She's also an extremely effective communicator. And she has this natural inclination for inspiring other people. Like, her high energy and very specific kind of way that she, champions everybody who's in her class and inspires them to push themselves a little bit harder, I think is just a real cool thing. And it's something that's not like, it's uniquely her. Like, her use of language is very specific also, but it's very Robin. Like, her idioms and the way that she kind of, comes up with these mantras are so uniquely her. And I think there's something really special about that. Like, I don't know how she gets up and teaches those classes every single day and has such high energy. Like, I'm I'm an introvert, right? Like, she is a natural extrovert and she's doing exactly, what she's supposed to be doing in the world. And, she's cool. Like,
Awesome.
Real infectious, beautiful energy about her that makes you believe in yourself. Like, it's all about self-empowerment with her.
I love it. And by the way, I highly recommend people watch or listen to some of the older podcasts here with Robin, because that's before Robin becomes Robin Arzon Peloton. She's, I think, still a lawyer at the time. And it's kind of amazing kind of see
her journey from there.
Yeah. And what kind of, and also you kind of see like, oh, this person's exactly the same, right? Like, they're exactly
really
the same
authentic.
person.
Yeah.
And this person's probably going to blow up when they absolutely did.
For me, sure. I think the days when I have really hard runs, like I'm really not motivated, that's when I open up the Peloton app and I have like a Robin instructed run, because she'll like bring in some music which I haven't heard before. It's like high energy, high tempo, and she's kind of walking me through the run. Most times, when I usually run, I don't like listening to music. It's usually a book, or I just run in silence. Running is almost meditative for me. But the days when it's hard, it's Robin who's in my ear trying to tell me how to run. So I really
Right.
appreciate her for like
Yeah.
the energy that she brings in.
And telling
Okay.
you to polish your crown, right?
Yeah, yeah.
I like
Or
it.
pay the rent, or it's one of those.
Yeah.
Okay, last question, and this is kind of a deep one, which we try to ask every one of our guests. You had impact on millions of people's lives. You've been tremendously successful. Let's fast forward several decades into the future. Maybe like over like 70, 80 years, and you're looking back. What would you want your legacy to be? What would make you go? Obviously, it's kind of a huge personal component to it. What make you like, okay, I did what I set out to do, or I'm extremely proud of everything I've accomplished?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I feel, and this is the truth, like I feel so fulfilled in what I'm doing now. And I'm so grateful to be in the position that I'm in, to have these conversations like every day. Like I can't believe like this is my job, to engage amazing people and share their wisdom with a large audience. Like it's such a cool thing. Like it's so gratifying in so many ways. So if it all ended right now and this is all that it ever will be for me, like it's a life well lived. Like I feel like I've already, created the legacy that I want. And it doesn't need to be any bigger or any more amazing than it already is. And I'm very conscious that this is the good time. Like I don't know how long this will go on, but right now, like everything is really fantastic, and I try to live in that awareness every single day. But assuming I will live for decades longer and will have the opportunity to look back on my life, I hope that I'm able to continue doing what I'm doing. And obviously everybody wants growth and they want to impact more people. But for me, it's really mostly about like, how do I better serve the people who are already taking time out of their busy day to tune into the content that I'm creating? And how can I, help to improve lives in the most substantive and material way possible? And I feel like I'm endeavoring to do that now. And hopefully I will find new and kind of more impactful ways to do that. And beyond that, I hope that I have, an amazing relationship with my children. Like that's super important to me. How do I stay connected to them in the most intimate way throughout the course of their lives? That's a huge priority to me. And my friendships as well. The people like Mike Fremont that I look up to have done an amazing job of staying connected to friends and cultivating community. And I think as we age and we get busy and we have families, particularly for men, we lose touch with our friendships. Like people that we used to spend tons of time with, now we're too busy to make time for them. And I'm trying to make my friendships a greater priority, because I don't want to be 75 or 80 years old and only have one friend at best. I want to be surrounded by loved ones. I want to have amazing relationships with my children and hopefully their children. And regard my life looking back in the rear view mirror as somebody who, tried to make the world a little bit of a better place.
Wow. Thank you for that. When I first met you, I came home and I told Aarthi, like, Rich might be the most self-actualized person I've met in quite a while. And I think that came out right there. But Rich, seriously, I think, the work you do is tremendous. And hopefully you get a chance to do it for decades and decades longer. Hopefully, you're inspiring people with...
I really appreciate through the podcast and through other means, through your website, through the books, through the meal planner, how much you tend to give back, and how much you're like helping other people look at their potential and help them grow. I think it's really incredible what you're doing and what you've already done so far.
Yeah. Thank you so
Oh,
much for
thank
doing
you.
this. Hopefully do this for decades longer in the metaverse, or in some future technology thingamajig you can't even think of now. But Rich, you're an amazing person. Thank you so much. And this was amazing. Thank you.
Thank you. It was a pleasure talking to you guys. And I look forward to finally meeting you guys in person in
Yeah.
the
We
near
should,
future.
though. I feel like I don't know. I meant
We
to
have to do a 60-day,
yeah,
90-day
yeah. Might
program,
need to fix my
workout
diet
No, no,
before
no,
I
program.
no,
meet
no,
you.
no, 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 no.
Right.
No,
Like
no,
Rich,
no.
Rich seems like a very unfun
All
person to
right.
eat a meal with, right? You go meet him and he's like,
There'll be a berry smoothie.
yeah, like no Indian food. Like I don't know. Like yeah, we might need to work on that.
It's
Thank
all
you, Rich,
fine.
support.
Don't worry about it. All right, you guys.
Thanks, man.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Cheers.
Subscribe to the YouTube channel, The Good Time Show by Aarthi and Sriram.